Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Nosferatu, a symphony of horror from 2023, starring Doug Jones, Sarah Carter, Emery's Cooper, Julie Fisher, and Jack Turner, directed by David Lee Fisher. Now, this has got to be a student project because I've never even heard of this movie existence until, I don't know, maybe a couple of weeks ago. And I just reviewed Abigail, and that was before this movie or yeah, around there. And I don't know. I This felt like a student project of this director, David Lee Fisher. But let's see if this is any better. Let's get into the movie. The movie opens with Thomas Hutter, played by Emery's Cooper, getting ready for work while his fiancee Ellen, played by Sarah Carter, has a spider on her hand, and he asks her to kill it, but she doesn't as Thomas leaves, and the cinematography is pretty, but almost too pretty while it shouldn't look like that. While Thomas gets to work and his boss gets a piece of paper from Count Orlok, played by Doug Jones, who was in the Abe Sapien in Hellboy versus the Amphibian Man from The Shape of Water, and he was the Silver Surfer in Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. Let's move on. Oh, and I almost forgot that, and that creature with the eyes right here in his hands in Pan's Labyrinth. I forgot about that. So I try to forget that movie, to be honest. Who wants to sell his house, and Thomas's boss sends Thomas to Count Orlok and his castle. And I don't know this character, as I don't get to know the characters, as I don't care for any of them, as all while the acting in this is fucking horrible, as we get quickly into the plot right away, as this version of the story feels completely unnecessary. Thomas and Ellen go to the house of Ruth, played by Julie Fisher, and her husband, who's never named, as Ellen has to stay with them while Thomas is out of the house for a business the night before. Thomas goes on the business trip. And next day, Thomas feels overwhelmed, and when he leaves, the shot looked blue at night, while others looked white in the daytime. And this score felt familiar. Like, I've heard some pieces of this score from other movies, like, for example, X-Men Apocalypse. And that's not a good movie to bring up, this score of this movie's comparison. I don't know what the name of that score in particular is. While Ellen dreams something horrible might go wrong, this movie gets all the story wrong. Thomas arrives at an inn he's to stay at, as they advise him to not go to the castle of Count Orlok at night time, while Thomas acts all ignorant when a waitress goes up to him, as it almost looks like he wanted to cheat on his wife or having an affair or whatever. As the owner of the inn says she doesn't speak your language, and he believes she does, as he sees a man with no eyes earlier in the scene, while at night he wakes up babbling about how Count Orlok is here with them in the middle of the fucking night, and the man is blind and warns him about Count Orlok's presence and gets killed by something off screen, as I'm believing it was Count Orlok, while Ruth comes to Ellen's bedroom as Thomas wakes up and misses the train and travels by foot to Count Orlok's castle, as Ellen sees Count Orlok's throat of a servant, and he gets arrested. And oh my god, there's so many problems with this version of Nosferatu, it's not funny. A carriage arrives to Thomas after a long walk there, and he goes to Count Orlok's castle, and when he arrives, he meets Count Orlok and enters his castle to give him some papers to sign, while Doug Jones does look creepy as Count Orlok, but I personally think he's better off in Guillermo del Toro's movies than here, in my opinion. As Thomas briefly cuts his finger like in the previous movies, and Count Orlok tries to suck his finger, and Thomas gets scared, but I don't think this I don't like as I don't think this version, it doesn't look frightening like the trailers for the version Robert Eggers has got coming out looks like, as that looks more horrifying than this crap. Thomas wakes up the next day and wonders what the fuck happened the night before, and he thinks about it as he took his pocket watch with a photograph of Ellen, and he thinks about going to her as he rips the picture in half and disappears, and Thomas packs up his things and sees the book of Nosferatu, while Ellen wakes up and feels Count Orlok's curse as he's coming for her after meeting her fiance or husband. I couldn't even tell you what the fuck was going on there. And get bed rest, and the acting in this is horrible. Some bad-looking skeletons go after Thomas as he tries to escape, while Count Orlok goes to Ellen on ship to meet her as he gets down on a rough landing, and Thomas sees the driver of the carriage and says to him he knows him, as he'll find him and kill him, as he faints and wakes up and wanting to get his wife immediately, as some people interrogate Count Orlok's servant as he laughs as the interrogation like it's a fucking joke. And trust me when I say this movie is a fucking joke. Count Orlok's servant is getting his room swept up, and at this point, I'm almost checked out of this movie, as this is going by so damn quick, as I get the feeling Count Orlok is on the ship, the Demeter, if I were to guess from the last voyage of the Demeter, and kills everyone on ship, and crash lands on deck, and the servant feels Count Orlok's presence, and I don't like how this exists, but unfortunately it does. Thomas gets home and Ellen and tells her something about is coming for her, while the servant beats up on the guard and escapes from the prison, and while he awaits from his master's appearance of Count Orlok, as the servant throws a brick at Thomas, while he's worried about Ellen, and Thomas tries to shoot the servant, and Thomas is frustrated that harm will come to Ellen as he warns the troops, but they don't believe him, and suddenly the movie at night becomes red. And this is a poor choice of this movie. And to do why the fuck is this happening? Like, why is the changing colors, as that was annoying me throughout? Thomas gets a man involved with a case of Count Orlok and the servant coming to the door and threatening him with a knife until the servant is shot dead. And by whom? Well, who cares? Because a name was never revealed, while Count Orlok is feeding himself to Ellen until daylight comes, and like any vampire, he dies from sunlight in a cheap way, while unfortunately, Ellen dies. And do I care for this climax? Absolutely not, as this is the worst telling of the Nosferatu story. But how worse was it? Let's get to the rating. I'll give this movie a 2.2 out of 10. The movie is pretty to look at, almost too pretty as the cinematography, but looks good. But overall, I don't know the characters by their names, as I don't care for any of them whatsoever, as we get quickly into the plot, as this is a 90-minute movie, while the acting in this is fucking horrible, and this remake feels completely unnecessary, as hopefully we'll get a better version of the movie next time when Robert Eggers is behind the camera. Shots at night look blue, while during the day it looked completely white. And this movie makes all the wrong choices on how the audience for this picture, as there were times I felt the score wasn't original. Like, I heard a piece of music from X-Men Apocalypse, and that's not a good thing for a movie that to copyright other movies in general. The movie tells the story all wrong, as there's so many problems with this version of Nosferatu, and I really like Doug Jones from the works of Guillermo del Toro, but he pulls off a poor Count Orlok. But don't get me wrong, he looks scary, but it doesn't give me a reason to recommend this movie, as this is a solid non-recommendation for this version of Nosferatu, because it tells it wrong. And it doesn't scare me like the trailers for Robert Eggers' new version, as this thing had so many problems it wasn't funny at all. So I would like to thank you guys for joining me, and next time I will be back with Robert Eggers' version of Nosferatu. And until then,
I am Nosferatu, and I will suck your blood.